If you like the Metal Gear Solid series, then great, there's a lot of similar elements in Rising you'll enjoy. If you don't like those games, then great, because Rising is completely different. Let's get started. Metal Gear Rising Revengeance is a spin-off of the Metal Gear Solid series, and timeline-wise it's set 4 years after the events of Metal Gear Solid 4. You don't need to have played the original series to get what's going on though. All you need to know is that most of the world's wars and conflicts are being fought by cyborgs belonging to private military companies. One particularly cool cyborg is Raiden, the guy we'll be playing as. At the game's opening, he's working security for an unnamed African country's government. They're pretty happy with the job he's been doing, but Raiden might struggle to get a reference off them after a rogue PMC called Desperado attacks and kidnaps the Prime Minister. Things don't go so well from there, and Raiden gets his shit kicked in by Jetstream Sam, one of Desperado's top captains and overall general badass. The upside to this is that he gets some shiny new cybernetic upgrades, so he can head out to stop Desperado's plans and maybe even get some revengeance in the process. First up, let's talk about how the game looks. Considering it came out in 2013, it's held up really well. Raiden himself looks great, as do the enemies you'll be fighting. For your generic human enemies, the strong art design helps you spot the more dangerous guys out of a crowd, which really helps when the screen gets busy. The designs of the Winds of Destruction, Desperado's captains who serve as bosses throughout the game, are all really great. I think it's a hallmark of a strong artistic vision when you can use a lot of unique and varied elements in a design, and still have it all come together to fit coherently in the end. Each member of the Winds of Destruction checks this box. As for the environments, industrial is probably the best way to describe how they feel. Military bases and labs are the most common areas, and for the most part everything looks quite grey and muted. The nicest looking area of the game is this Japanese garden, and it's over just as soon as it starts. To be fair though, the main focus is on the action taking place in those environments, so it's not all that big of a problem. It might not even bother you if you only do a single playthrough. Now let's talk about the music. It's one of the most praised aspects of this game, and with good reason. During quiet moments, it's good at building tension and a feeling of espionage, and it would fit well with the soundtrack of the main series games. When the action kicks in, it's heavy and electronic. Even if you don't like this kind of music normally, it just fits so well here, it's hard not to enjoy as Raiden flings around the screen chopping guys up. Where it really shines is in the boss themes. These usually start with an instrumental version and gradually ramp up through the fight, with the vocals kicking in during the final phase. The lyrics usually give some insight into the boss's motivation or backstory too, so they do more than just generate hype. It's all incredibly over the top, and I love it for it. Let's move on and talk about the gameplay. The focus is on fast-paced, sword-based combat, a concept Kojima Productions didn't have a lot of experience with when they were developing the initial idea. This led to difficulties that eventually resulted in them handing the development reins to Platinum Games, whose experience on games like Bayonetta gave them good credentials. So combat is the main focus. You can usually get into it quickly thanks to how fast Raiden moves. You can move even faster using the Ninja Run, which has you automatically jump, slide and climb. Having all these things done for you might not sound great, but like I said, the combat is where the main focus is, so I don't mind options to minimise the time to get from fight A to fight B. Raiden has two types of attacks, light and heavy, and there's a good number of different combinations you can pull off. It's not quite as deep as similar games in the genre, like Devil May Cry for example, but it's still engaging and a lot of fun. People better than me are able to pull off some pretty impressive combos, and maybe you could too. Your defensive options are pretty limited, and the way you go about blocking is a bit different and might take some getting used to. There's no dedicated block button, so instead when you see an attack coming, you push the movement stick in the direction of that enemy and tap the light attack button, which immediately triggers the block animation. Having this on the same button that you use to attack might seem a little bit unusual, but it quickly starts to feel natural. The developers didn't want the combat to feel defensive and by extension slow, so this way you're really incentivized to keep on the offensive. You can do it at any point in your combo too, so there's no need to worry about overextending yourself and being left open. If you time your block just right, you'll do a parry and counter, which deals a lot of damage and is a good opening to enter Blade Mode. So what's Blade Mode? Well, it's this game's coolest feature, and it lets you precisely cut through pretty much anything. Hitting enemies will fill up your fuel cell meter, and when it's full and glowing blue, a pull of the left trigger will get you into the mode. There's a ghostly plane that you can move around to cut exactly how you want. Your light attack will perform a horizontal slash and the strong will do a vertical slash. Alternatively, you can pull the right stick all the way back and release, which will slash in the opposite direction to where you pulled it. This is absurdly fun to use, and it's surprising that no other big games have stolen the concept. Weak enemies like your regular cyborg jobber can be cut in two just as soon as you enter Blade Mode, but for the bigger guys in armour or the large robots you'll have to soften them up a bit first. Parts will glow blue once you've knocked armour off, showing you Blade Mode can be used to remove that part. Because your enemies are cyborgs and robots, they'll just keep going after you despite losing limbs. Don't think you're safe just because a guy has no arms. He's still got 2 good legs ready for your face. While in Blade Mode, you'll see a red square on the enemy. This is the location of their fuel cell, and if you cut through it, you can press a follow-up button to take it for yourself. This is called Zandatsu, and it immediately refills your health and fuel cell meter, so you want to be doing it a lot throughout your fights. This is a really interesting feature because it makes you play a lot more aggressively. When you're low on health, you won't be hiding. Instead, you'll be going on the offensive to try and pull off a Zandatsu to get you back in tip-top condition. Cuts in Blade Mode count towards your combo hits too, so it's a good way to rack up some big numbers, which can help with the points and ranking you get after each combat encounter. The one clear negative when it comes to gameplay is the camera. Its default position is directly behind Raiden's back, and it's determined to get back to that position the second you start moving it around. As soon as you stop moving the stick, it will jump back, which can get really frustrating in combat where enemies will often jump around and end up out of your line of sight. It reacts strangely with the environment too, so if you get smacked into a wall, you'll probably feel just as disoriented as Raiden must. There is a target lock which helps, but outside of the bosses, it's not a perfect solution because you'll often be fighting in groups, and you'll likely be changing who you're targeting at a second's notice. Overall, it's not a huge hindrance to the gameplay, but it does stick out as a clear negative. Outside of your sword, there's also items you can pick up and use, but to be honest they're a bit lackluster. You've got your standard health and fuel cell items, which once equipped will fill your bars back up just as soon as they're depleted. Other things like grenades or rocket launchers have to be chosen and equipped from the menu and then used with the left bumper. I felt like these slowed down the combat, and so I barely used them. Why bother pausing and equipping a ranged option if the helicopter is just going to come down and ram me? Instead, I used the item slot mostly for the cardboard box. Don't forget, this is a Metal Gear game, so they didn't want to just throw stealth completely out the window. There's a couple of sections where you're encouraged to be a bit stealthier, but it's never a requirement. Anybody you do sneak up on can be killed instantly, so I mostly used it to take out a strong enemy as a combat opener. You do get a point bonus for clearing a section through stealth, but it sort of defeats the purpose of the game. I can imagine they were a bit worried about the reception the drastic change in direction might get from the hardcore fans, so I guess it's nice to at least have the option for them. The complete opposite of stealth is Ripper mode, which you unlock about halfway through the game. This is the Devil Trigger equivalent, and for the price of a constantly draining fuel cell meter, you'll do a lot more damage and have the chance to cause cuts and severs through normal combat. You can still enter Blade mode too, so you can pull off Zandatsus to keep Ripper mode going for longer than you might expect. It feels good to pop it off and see some arms flying when things get a bit too crazy. You'll be using all of the combat mechanics during the boss fights, which are the highlight of the game. They're challenging and usually test you on some key mechanic. You'd better learn how to parry if you want to get past Monsoon. This all culminates for the final boss, which we'll discuss more later. For now, we'll just say it's a great example of how to design a boss fight. During missions, you'll get battle points for doing well, which you can then use to purchase upgrades and extras. These include straight upgrades to your weapon like extra damage or extra fuel cell absorption, as well as extra combo moves. There are costumes too, which can either be just cosmetic or can give you a benefit like carrying more items. If you've ever wanted to play as Grey Fox, well now you can. After defeating certain bosses, you'll unlock their weapons for purchase, which you can then equip from the item menu. These take over your strong attack. It's nice to have the variety, but I didn't use them that much. They don't have as many combos as your regular sword does, and in general they're quite situational. Because you have to pause the action to enter the menu to equip them, even when these situations did arise, I usually just carried on fighting with the regular sword. If it was easier to equip and change between them, I would have used them a lot more, so it's a shame there wasn't just a single button to do this. During missions, you'll sometimes run across guys with glowing arms, which you can cut off and collect. Doing this can get you new things to buy in the customize menu, some of which will really help you if you plan on trying some of the harder difficulties. The other collectible type thing is the VR missions, which you can find and unlock by running up to these laptops which are hidden throughout the world. You can access these during the mission or from the menu later, and their premise is simple. They set you up with a challenge and you see how fast you can do it. There's a decent number of these, and they can get pretty damn hard. It's not something I would spend a lot of time on, but there's enjoyment to be had for the proper combo heads. So while the gameplay might stray from the main Metal Gear games, the story stays true to a lot of the same themes. In classic Metal Gear fashion, you can expect a lot of speeches about politics, economics, and the philosophy of war.
I possess an intellect far beyond human reckoning.
You don't say. Okay then, what's the meaning of life? Why are we here?
I am here to kill you.
Of course, this is done in a wacky way, which is really enjoyable. The whole plot is definitely not as detailed and intricate as the main series, but that's not surprising. After all, Metal Gear Solid 4 still holds the record for the longest cutscene in a game. The voice acting is pretty great, and helps give a lot of personality to the characters. It's all completely over the top, and Raiden's voice is so edgy sometimes it feels like he's trying to cut you, but it does fit in the way everything is presented. While cutscenes are your main source of plot, you'll also get slowed down via calls throughout your missions to get extra info. This doesn't really fit well with the fast-paced nature of the game, but I'm not really sure what else they could have done. In a similar vein, you can pause the game at any time and call your crew on the codec, just like the regular Metal Gear games. These calls give you an insight into the characters' opinions and feelings, as well as just more information on the events unfolding. There's also a lot of comedy and fluff thrown in too, which is fun. A lot of dialogue was recorded for these, and it's a shame so much effort went into something that a lot of players won't hear. You can access all of them from the main menu at least, but overall it highlights one of the difficulties in porting the storytelling from a slower paced game to one where you barely stop moving. Along his way to stop Desperado, Raiden learns more and more about their operations and motives, along with finding out some things about himself too. In my last video I dived straight into spoilers without any warning, which I feel pretty bad about, so I'm giving this warning now to skip to the time shown on screen to avoid any further story spoilers. The main draw of the game is to have fun making people sushi, so of course this being a Metal Gear game, it gets addressed in a meta way through the story. After the Prime Minister is killed during the opening of the game, Raiden makes up his mind that anyone on Desperado's payroll deserves to die. Couple this with the fact that he admits he enjoys killing, and you end up with him making some pretty troubling statements.
I'm not complaining. They're like walking vending machines.
Right. Vending machines full of blood.
Later on, he's challenged on this view by Sam, and he starts hearing the pleading voices of his enemies during combat. In another story, you might expect him to have a bit of a change of heart, and to be fair, it does mess him up for about 5 minutes. But then he pretty much doubles down on it, fully committing to the concept that one life is fine to take as long as it saves many other lives. Next up, we have to talk about the big bad, Senator Armstrong. In the grand scheme of things, he's barely in the game. You see a glimpse of him early on, and then he turns up to reveal his plan in the last hour or so. Despite this, he has a hell of an impact and is one of the most memorable parts of the game. There's a few factors that make this true. First of all, you've got the absurdity factor, which keeps ramping up the longer he's on screen. It starts off with his plan being revealed. He wants to cause an international incident to use the war economy to get elected President of the United States. He then hops in a Metal Gear, so off the bat you're fighting a presidential candidate who has a spider mech at his disposal. After beating the Metal Gear though, Armstrong gets out and does this.
I don't have time for this. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Let's go. The hell are you thinking? Don't fuck with this, Senator!
He then reveals that his first speech was all nonsense. He hates the war economy and politics just as much as Raiden. He's only using it to get into a position of power, where he can then put a stop to it for good. His vision of America is extreme survival of the fittest. There would be no government or large organisations telling people what to do, and instead everyone just fights for whatever they themselves believe in. Throughout the fight, Raiden and Armstrong are arguing about their philosophies. At a base level, they're both pretty similar, in that they both want to address the problem of the weak in society. For Raiden, that means giving them protection by killing the strong who try to prey on them. In Armstrong's world, the weak would have to adapt and become strong or die off, so after a rough period there wouldn't be any. He points to Raiden as a successful example of this. As a weak child, he was forced to become a child soldier in Liberia, but by fighting for what he believed in, he was able to grow and move from being the weak to being the strong. He's obviously mental, but he's very charismatic, and the similarities between the two make it really enjoyable to see them sparring off. As a final boss, he's fantastic. He's a real challenge that tests every skill you've used up to this point. The music is also great, which makes the whole thing incredibly enjoyable and very memorable. An ultimate test of the skills the player has been practicing throughout the game is the best kind of final boss for me, and Armstrong is a great example of this. Even after he gets Temple of Doomed, he still sort of wins. Raiden fought for what he believed in and proved himself right by beating the opposing view not through polite debate, but through combat. The post-credit scene shows Raiden setting out to fight his own war, which is exactly what Armstrong wanted to give everyone the opportunity to do. Obviously, he's doing this on his own terms in an unchanged world, but it's still something interesting to think about when you replay the game and listen to how the two argued their views. I wanted to mention this because I sometimes hear people writing the story off as complete schlock, and while I can see where the sentiment comes from, I don't think it's completely fair. So overall, the story is enjoyable and scratches that Metal Gear itch quite well. After finishing the game, you've got 2 extra short stories where you can play as Jetstream Sam and Blade Wolf. These were originally paid DLC that got a lot of shit at the time because of how short they were, but they now come baked into the standard PC version, which is nice. Let's start with Sam, which tells the story of how he first joined Desperado. He's got his own combos and moves that help differentiate him from Raiden. For example, all his strong attacks can be charged, letting them do a lot more damage as finishers to your combos. His other main mechanic is to taunt enemies. He can piss off anything with his cheeky grin, and when he does, they'll glow red and become much more aggressive. This also increases the damage that Sam deals to them, so the trick is to pull off a taunt to help you kill them quickly, ideally before they can do anything to you. It does take a little bit of practice to get right. Sam is a lot of fun to play as, but the areas and bosses are all recycled from the main story. You can beat the whole thing in about an hour and a half, probably an hour if you're good, which is a bit of a downer. The storytelling is also not up to par with that of the main game. I said it tells the story of how he joined Desperado, and that's true. As for why he did though, it's a lot less clear. The whole thing is fun enough, but the quality of the storytelling and the length stop it from being a great addition. The Blade Wolf story is a bit better overall. It shows you what he was up to before running into Raiden at the start of the game. It's all recycled areas again, but this time there's a new boss thrown in, and he even has his own music track. Blade Wolf is more focused on stealth, and you're encouraged to do some platforming too to get an advantage in this regard. His attacks are a bit slower than Raiden and Sam, so it's a nice mix-up and change of pace. Again though, the story is very short, coming in at about an hour. Both characters have new VR missions, but neither can be customized or upgraded, so there's not too much reason to replay them all that much. I would have really enjoyed if you could replay the main story with them. I guess it was limited time and money, and to be fair, it could have been difficult to implement with some of the cutscenes and quicktime events, especially for Blade Wolf. All in all, it's nice to have these characters bundled with the game, but given that they have so much potential, it's a bit of a shame they don't live up to it. Overall, it's well worth trying Metal Gear Rising. Longtime Metal Gear fans can enjoy the storytelling and themes on offer, and can even use stealth to recreate some of the aspects of the Solid series. Action fans can look forward to an engaging combat system with fantastic bosses and of course Blade Mode, which I swear will never get boring. I'm aiming to release a new video every 2 weeks, usually on a Wednesday. Next up we'll be looking at a game that takes its artistic inspiration from paintings like this, so please subscribe if you think that will be interesting, and I hope to see you there.